Everyone come over. We're gonna have a folding my laundry and doing my dishes competition. See who's the winner. What's good? Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of The Newest Olympian. My name is Mike Schubert. I am the titular Newest Olympian. I'm a 32-year-old man who never read the Percy Jackson books as a kid. I read them as an adult because I was determining if it was a book series that society had been sleeping on. I said yes, and now I'm seeing if society has also been sleeping on the Heroes of Olympus series. I finished the first book in that series, which means it's myth time. And if it's myth time, there is someone that we love to talk to about those myths, and we are joined once again by our official myth correspondent, Dr. Moiya McTier, who you might know from her writing The Milky Way book and the new book that is in production currently, or her podcasting efforts, or her fight against AI, which I personally love. It's Dr. Moiya McTier. How is it going, Moiya?
Oh, a lot better after that intro. Hey, Mike, thanks for having me.
I am happy to have you on the podcast. I am happy to talk about myths and such. That's more fun than what's going on in the world. We're recording this on November 6th. Ha 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 ha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha.
It's going to be a good time talking about things that do not exist.
Let's get into the myths. So what's interesting this time around is that we have Greek stuff, but now Roman things have been introduced into the series. And now we also even have a Cherokee myth that is on the discussion list. So I sent you over a list of topics to discuss. I say we just get right into it, yeah?
Please, yeah. I have not read this series, so I was surprised to see the Cherokee edition, and I'm curious to hear how the Roman stuff plays a part. So yeah, let's get in.
So very briefly, what basically is happening in this book and now overall in the series, because at the time of recording, I'm like a third of the way through the second book, even though podcast-wise, this is coming out shortly after finishing the first book. This is just how calendars work sometimes. But basically, what we have learned is that it's not just Greek gods and stuff, but there's also Roman gods in this universe. And some people worship and follow the gods and have like, you know, they're demigods and they're parents, but it's like with the Roman aspects of the gods. And we're starting to learn a little bit more about like how they fit into the world. But we basically meet a new character who has a Roman past, and we learn that there's a Roman camp, like a Camp Half-Blood, but with Roman stuff, and it's all Roman everything. So we have this situation where like, depending on when a certain character will talk to a certain deity, they will maybe switch to their Roman form. So in this book, they go and talk to Aeolus, the wind god. But when one of the characters who has more of that Roman influence, when he talks to him, he changes his appearance and everything to fit what the Romans viewed about him instead.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's like they're still the same characters. It's not like there is a Hera and there is a Juno, but like there's just one, and when she's talking with the Roman people, sometimes more of that Juno element comes out.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, it's been interesting, and I'm excited to see like how it further develops. And then other stuff, our baddie that we're fighting this time around is Gaia, or as the audiobook narrator calls her, Gia, which I thought, I thought it was really bad, and I always call her Gia on the podcast because I think it's very funny. And I always imagine her like Gia, like an Italian lady.
Yeah.
But what people informed me was that it's Gia, probably more like Pangaea. What are your thoughts on the pronunciation of Gia versus Gaia?
Look, I cannot throw stones from my glass house of terrible pronunciation. I am all over the internet mispronouncing things, but I feel like Gaia is a pretty basic one.
That was my thought as well. So at least like I understand there is a reasoning. I just think they're still wrong, but at least there like is a basis for it. But yeah, so she's like the big bad we're fighting this time around instead of Kronos. She's trying to raise up the giants instead of kind of like raising up the Titans. So that's kind of what's going on. Like Porphyrion was someone that we fought against in this one. And intentionally, I left some of those characters out of this discussion because they seem like we're going to learn more about them later. I personally, especially since you haven't read this one, I didn't want there to be a spoiler of like, yeah, Porphyrion, blah, blah, blah. And then like I get to book 4 and I'm like, I know the secret to defeating Porphyrion. So
okay, so should I not tell you the thing that I have in my notes about Porphyrion?
Tell me. And I'll probably forget.
Okay.
Honestly.
Cool.
So it's all good. But she's like the big bad that we're dealing with this time around. And then as far as the way the Cherokee comes into the mix, one of our new heroes that we're following is named Piper, and her dad is Cherokee, and her grandpa very much inspired by and a believer in Cherokee mythology. So that kind of came into play a little bit. And I think it might come into play more as the series goes on, but not really sure yet. So that's kind of like where we're at. And that's why there's more than just Greek folk this time around.
Okay. Sounds good.
Cool. Now let's get into the topics. Basically, I did what I always do, which is I go through the transcripts of the podcast and then I Control F for Dr. Moiya, and then I write down all the things that in the past I have said, oh, hey, I got to ask Dr. Moiya about this. So this is in order of me asking you in the past, but now in the present, what's the deal with, as people want to pronounce Enceladus, as I want to pronounce as someone who took Latin in high school, Enceladus, or is how I said it on the podcast instead, because they make a joke about this and I just rolled with it, enchiladas. I know Enceladus that's like the most common accepted pronunciation, especially because there's a moon named after him, right?
See, this is interesting. Yes. In addition to being one of the moons of Saturn and one of the most interesting moons in the solar system, because maybe it has the right conditions for life.
Oh.
Yes.
Fun.
Very exciting. Most astronomers that I know call this Enceladus.
Oh, wow. So I've not even been close at all the whole time. Maybe that's why people were so mad.
Well, who's to say that astronomers are right? We take liberties with our words all the time. But in addition to the moon, Enceladus is a giant from Greek mythology and one of the 100 giants who, by most accounts, was the offspring of Gaia and Tartarus. So very early on. And he fought Athena in the Gigantomachy, which was the war between the giants and the Olympians. It does sound like they're having Gaia be the orchestrator of that war.
Yeah, they're basically bringing it back. So the whole thing was like they had this war before. I don't know what they've been referring to it as in the books, but basically they've been having this war, and the big rule is that like gods can't defeat them alone, demigods can't defeat them alone. The two have to work together. It has to be gods and demigods fighting. I don't know if that is a mythology basis or if that's just Rick in the book. Okay, seems like mythology basis.
That is a mythology basis. I can just to get quickly into the mythological origin of the Gigantomachy. It happened after the Titanomachy, so after the Olympians overthrew the Titans and then put the Titans in Tartarus as punishment.
Yeah.
Gaia, the mother of the Titans, was upset that her children had been treated so terribly, so she took the giants and brought them up to fight against the Olympians. Enceladus is one of the major figures from the Gigantomachy, one of the, I'd say, leaders of the giant force, and he fought against Athena, who eventually defeated him and buried him under Mount Etna. But there was a prophecy that said the giants overall couldn't be defeated unless a human helped the Olympians. And the human in the myths was Heracles.
Okay, cool. Yes. Now that has kind of been brought up of like, they're not fudging that around in terms of Titan War, then the response being this, though they haven't like called it specifically the Gigantomachy. That's what you called it?
Gigantomachy, but that's me being Appalachian.
Okay, look, I like it. I think it's fun. And the omaki suffix is at least something that I'm familiar with by doing these myth episodes. So, yeah, okay. That's basically how he shows up in this book as well. So that makes sense for Enceladus, who I've now only just learned. As I look, even in the episodes, I was like, I'll learn how to say these words when Moiya's on. And here we are. Speaking of words I don't know exactly how to say, this one, he shows up as more of kind of like a bit character, but Calais? It's hard because when he shows up, it's in Quebec City. So I don't know if they like Frenchify it or whatever, but Calais, that guy, Wind Boy.
It is from the Greek spelling with a K instead of a C. I have been saying Calais or Kalish, actually.
Ooh,
sometimes. This is one of the Boreads. He has a twin brother, Zethes.
Yeah, he also shows up.
Okay, great. And together they are sons of Boreas, who is the god of the north wind and of winter. They have a human mother, and the two twins have wings and silver hair, according to a lot of mythology. And they joined the Argonauts, Jason and the Argonauts, on the quest for the Golden Fleece. They're mentioned a few times by name in those stories. They did a few deeds. They chased away the Harpies, who were attacking Phineas, a character that helped them. He was a prophet. They also were kind of in a beef with Heracles because while Heracles was off searching for someone in Mysia, I think is how it's said, Mysia, the two twins convinced all of the Argonauts to leave Heracles behind to get away from a figure we're talking about later in the episode. So yeah, they were involved with the Jason and the Argonauts myth. They were eventually killed. At least Calais or Calais was killed by Heracles.
Okay, cool. Yeah, they show up in the books and they make Cal, they call him Cal, I guess because it's hard to say his name. They make Cal like a hockey brute and they make Zethes like a fancy, like pretty boy. So fun little twist. And then I guess the next person to discuss, at least this book, she shows up at the same time is Khione, who my notes app may have translated to Khione. So apologies if by the time I copy pasted and sent it to you, it already did that. But yeah, Khione is someone who shows up and becomes kind of like this book's Luke, where she's like a mini bad kind of thing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, she's one of the sisters. There's also another sister named Cleopatra.
Okay.
Khione is a goddess of snow, and there's not much about her in the myths.
Oh, okay. So Rick was kind of like cooking with that then.
I think so. Yeah, as far as I could tell.
That's interesting that she's not necessarily a big deal in mythology. Maybe that was one of those things where Rick was like, well, there's not a lot about her. She mainly just kind of shows up as like this ice princess when they go to Boreas and it's all snow, wind, whatever. And then she comes in towards the end of like trying to get revenge. The new main character that we followed, there's like a new trio, but one of them is named Jason. So he has a lot of like callbacks to the original Jason. And as I'm sure you kind of gathered, a lot of these people I'm asking you about are like in Argonaut Town.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of like, oh, you know, when he would tell people his name is Jason, they would get all pissed. And it's like, I wonder if they had run-ins with the past Jason. Yeah. So it was pretty
callback.
Yeah.
Yeah. The only other story I could find for Khione was that she, and the myths that I read, said that she was impregnated by Poseidon.
Oh, very interesting.
It's all very briefly mentioned.
Okay. All righty. So another one that gets brought up is, and maybe this is just something that is where the answer will just be like, yep, is that I think when it came to Enceladus and all of that, Hera gets captured in this book again, and they have to save Hera. That's kind of like the main sort of like individual quest of book one. And she says something to the effect of, oh, last time I was captured, a war was sparked. So is that in reference to a particular like big thing in mythology in the past?
Not from what I could find in the Gigantomachy.
Okay.
I couldn't find any reputable sources that said she was kidnapped during the war with the giants, but there was one often repeated story about the Gigantomachy that says during one of the battles, Hera was captured on the field by Porphyrion, except Porphyrion gets conflated with some of the other giant kings. So some other possible names are Alcyoneus and Eurymedon.
Okay.
Some scholars will like mix those three together, but he captured Hera on the field and was about to assault her, as the myths put it, and then Zeus attacked him with a lightning bolt and Heracles shot him with an arrow. And that was the way that they ended the Gigantomachy. That was the human coming in and helping them defeat the giants.
Okay, interesting. Also, for non-spoiler reasons, I will just say, and like some people will know and some people won't, you've mentioned some other names there. They may or may not show up, at least in the beginning of book two. But for anyone who's like reading along with the podcast, I just won't say anything further. But that's very interesting of just like, ooh, okay, I got a little eyebrow raised just to see like, something is coming down the line.
Seems like it.
So there was a big thing in this book. One of the like middle of the book villains that they have to deal with is Medea. And what's interesting is the way she's presented is basically they talk to her. They don't realize it's Medea. I think you would like the vibe. She is basically running it's like an evil Macy's department store where like on the top floor, there's like potions and stuff. And then the next floor, there's like armor and all these other things. And then at the bottom, she has this like big fountain where I guess she's like brewing new things and stuff. But the vibe that they give is similar to, I think, the way they did Medusa, where the kids reveal some of the stories they've heard about Medea. And then she says like, oh, no, everyone's lying. That's not actually true. So basically, we learn all of the like, what I would say is like the known standard Medea stuff of like, she was with Jason. I guess if you also want to give the recap of kind of like Jason and Medea and all that. But The main question that I wanted to ask you was, is there question marks around like if she did stuff, or if this is another kind of like, oh, let's not really blame Medusa, we should be blaming Athena and Poseidon kind of deal? Or is this just Medea trying to like grasp at straws for innocence to try and trick people, as opposed to there being like, oh, well, maybe she's a complex character?
She's definitely a woman scorned. What happened to her in the darkest version of the stories isn't as bad as what happened to Medusa, but Jason was married to her. He promised her that they would get married, and they did, and they had kids. They were together for 10 years, and then Jason decides to just leave her. All of a sudden, he's like, you're a foreigner. Our marriage is invalid anyway, so it's null and void. He takes her kids and goes and marries a princess of Corinth, quote unquote, for the good of the family, so they can have good standing with the king. And of course Medea gets pissed off. Like, of course she's going to go and get her revenge. And so, yes, she kills the princess. She puts together this potion and puts it on a robe and then sends the beautiful robe to the princess, who then puts it on and dies. She kills her children. And all of that is so that Jason has neither wife nor heir, and so that his life is totally pointless. And, you know, I've never gone that far, but I've thought about how to get my revenge before, and I kind of see where she's coming from.
Okay, so seems more like it is in the camp of like, yes, a bad thing happened to her, but in Percy Jackson, she's trying to like blame other people and say that it's like a rumor and it's unsubstantiated. So it seems like not necessarily the case. The other one that this came into was like when it's like Jason is like leaving on a boat or something, and then doesn't she do something to like get her brother to come on the boat and then kill her brother?
Yeah, we can do the whole Jason and Medea thing from the beginning.
Yeah, let's just do it, because they do say it in the book, but I'm interested to hear, like, just if you were asked the story, what would you say and how it would compare to, like, my knowledge of it, which mostly comes from what they said in the book.
I would say that Jason was the rightful king of Iolcus, and his, like, uncle-type person, Peleus, took over and then sent Jason on an impossible quest and said that he would give Jason the throne back when Jason returned. That quest was to find the Golden Fleece. So Jason gathered some of the best-known heroes of his time, including Heracles, about 50 of them, and then went on a quest to Colchis, where the Golden Fleece was. The king of Colchis had a daughter named Medea, who was divine from both sides of her family. Her mother was an ocean nymph. Her father was the son of Helios, so she had divine blood in her. And I think in some ways that made her like easier to manipulate, because the gods, especially Athena and I think Hera, they favored Jason and they wanted him to succeed. So they got Aphrodite to make Medea fall in love with him. And she did.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And so then all of the things that she does after that to help Jason retrieve the Golden Fleece are under duress. Like, she is under some sort of influence. She betrays her father and her people again and again to help Jason do his tasks. I have a list here. She gives him an anti-burning potion so that he can yoke the fire-breathing bull, the cattle of bulls, on Colchis. She helped him trick the Spartoi, which were earthen warriors that sprung up from the ground when you planted dragon's teeth, which is like a metal legend if you just divorce it from context.
Well, in the Titan's Curse, the third book in Percy Jackson, doesn't he bury like dinosaur teeth, and then that is what grows his like skeleton army, right?
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
So I guess it's like that's got to be the inspiration. That's so cool.
And then she puts that same dragon whose teeth create the Spartoi to sleep, because that dragon guards the fleece, and then Jason's able to steal it away.
Is that what's his name? Ladon, right?
The dragon?
Yeah. I think his name was Ladon, Ladon, because he also shows up in the Titan's Curse as like the dragon that who were the sisters and stuff.
Grey sisters?
No, they're good sisters. They're like Artemis sisters of sorts. I'm trying to think of like who Zoe Nightshade was in.
Oh, Zoe was one of Artemis's huntresses, wasn't she?
Yes, right. But isn't there was something, oh man, Ladon, dragon, PJO. Let me see. Ladon is working with Zoe. Distraction of Polly sneaks to get to the Mountain of Despair. The Hesperides. That's who I was asking. The Hesperides?
Oh,
is this
that's
the same?
A different dragon guarding the golden apples.
Oh, Golden Apple's not Golden Fleece. Right, because Golden Fleece would be book 2. Golden Fleece was Sea of Monsters. Okay, fun.
So many dragons.
So wait, then there's a different dragon that is Peleus. Sorry, did you already say that?
Peleus.
Peleus, yeah.
He's not a dragon in mythology. He is Jason's like uncle type figure who sends him on the quest.
Oh, okay, so in Percy Jackson, there's a dragon that's guarding the golden fleece that's on Thalia's tree in camp, and that dragon's name is Peleus.
Fascinating. Yeah, I wonder if Uncle Rick just like took another name from the myth and brought it in that way.
Yeah, I guess so. Right, yeah. Peleus he's large enough to encircle Thalia's pine tree, snake-headed with copper scales and yellow eyes. I'm trying not to read too much because I have no idea if, when Peleus becomes a major character in the Trials of Apollo. So.
I mean, Medea, Jason, eventually go back and kill Peleus in the...
Oh, no! Well, I guess he did try to send Jason to his death in an impossible quest. Okay, interesting. Okay, but guard dragons and golden fleeces. Okay.
Yeah, if you have something golden that needs guarded, get a dragon.
Get a dragon. Okay.
So they flee. Medea and Jason and all the Argonauts, they make it off of Colchis, and they're fleeing in the Argo when her father sends a fleet after them, led by her brother, Absyrtus. And Medea comes up with a pretty messed up plan. There are other things that I would have done in her place, but she comes up with the idea to slow down and let her brother catch up with them, invite him on the ship, murder him, cut his body into tiny little pieces, and throw them out into the water. Not even to cast a spell. This is the thing. Medea's a sorceress. She's literally a priestess of Hecate. I imagined that she would cast a spell with these body parts. No. She just throws them in the water and is like, my dad's going to want to collect them. And then he does. And that slows the fleet down. Yeah.
So here's the interesting thing. In the book, along the lines of, like I'm saying, where Medea tries to blame it on other people, she says that she wasn't the one who did the cutting. It was the crewmates of the Argo. Is that true? Because she tries to basically get by on technicalities. Like she says, I didn't cut up my brother. I just convinced him to get on the ship and did something to hold him in place.
Right.
And then other people cut him up. And then she does the same thing with the killing of the children and Jason's new wife. Like, I forget what she says in the book, but it's something along the lines of like, well, I didn't do it. I just inspired the king to like kill his, it was like I inspired the townspeople or whatever to eat the children alive or whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. There are competing versions when you look at different stories. According to some, she killed her brother and then others chopped him up. According to some, Jason killed the brother and chopped him up. Yeah.
Right. But it seems like in this case, the different versions is more of like, did someone actually do the act? But regardless, it still feels like Medea was the catalyst in it, even if like bad things did happen to her, which I'm not trying to deny. But it seems like that's more of the like different version thing as opposed to the different version thing of Medusa, where some people are like, in some versions, we recognize she did nothing wrong, kind of.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Because she definitely was the instigator, even if it wasn't by her hand.
Yeah. Okay. And that's kind of like where they arrive in the book, because basically our heroes start questioning like, oh, is she evil, whatever. And they're kind of along the lines of, I think you're still bad, Medea. So their thinking is more along the lines of not believing her. Okay. That was the big question of the Medea thing.
Okay.
Is the complexities, but okay. Alrighty. I think that's a good point to take a little mid-roll break here, the myth roll break, and then we'll get back to discuss the second half of the myths. Hello and welcome to the Myth Roll Break Shubio edition. I'm here with some updates about the podcast, but also I need to address something that I said in the last episode. In the mid-roll break of last week's episode, I thanked the country of Brazil for being the reasoning that we call Uncle Rick. And I said, gracias, Brasil, thinking not that people in Brazil speak Spanish, but thinking that the Spanish word for thank you and the Portuguese word for thank you were the same. And even when I recorded this, I was like, should I look it up? I was like, nah, it's gracias in both. I don't know why I thought that, but I was convinced of that. And so much so that I didn't check. So now I'm going to Google sorry in Portuguese. Okay. It is, interesting. So it's disculpe, which I believe is excuse me in Spanish. But anyway, instead of saying lo siento, Brazil, I will say disculpe, Brazil. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe I've messed something else up, but I apologize. Anyway, I should talk about podcast stuff because there is a lot to discuss. First, scheduling-wise, I also need to address something that I said in the last mid-roll break. I don't know what I was doing at the last mid-roll break. It was late, probably. In that episode, I said I think I was going to take the last week of November off because of 5 Monday month stuff. December's a 5 Monday month, not November. So I will be taking the last week of December off. That also makes sense, holiday season and all that kind of stuff. So it feels like that makes the most sense. So I will be taking December 30th off in terms of there's not going to be an episode up. I might do a thing where I put like a little bonusy type thing on there. But also in regards to scheduling, we will be beginning our coverage of The Son of Neptune next week. Next Monday is our first episode. It is from the live show we did in New York City. As I've said, you can purchase the replay of that live stream, which had a multicam setup and really high quality visual and audio and all that kind of stuff. You can go to thenewsolympian.com/Patreon. There's a section called Shop, and you can just download that. And if you are a patron, you get 20% off. So that's pretty cool. And if you just cannot wait a full week for that next episode, you don't have to. You can go to Patreon. Another update is in regards to merch. After saying it for weeks and weeks, the TNO Series 1 beads and the TNO Heroes of Olympus inspired signed posters are restocked up at thenewsolympian.com/merch. Limited quantities of each, and those have sold out quite quickly in the past. So if you want to get them, I would say get them, especially with the holiday season rolling around. And also with the holiday season rolling around, Patreon unveiled a new feature, which I think is pretty cool. You can now gift a Patreon membership to someone else for a gift, maybe around the holidays, maybe a birthday, whatever. I'm going to put a post on Patreon up just in case it's not easy to find. I'll make a post that's like, hello, this is a thing now, and here's a link where you can do it. So if you want to do that, you can do it for someone. I will always, of course, do the shout outs and the shoutouts in the mid-roll break where I'll say their name, or if you make them a producer, I'll say it at the end of every episode. So fun stuff around. That is a cool feature that Patreon has finally made official, as opposed to people doing it unofficially for years. But shout out to you people who did it unofficially. I loved that. Always fun. Speaking of fun, we've got 3 live shows coming up in December. We've got one in Vienna, Virginia on December 3rd. That's very close to Washington, D.C. And then we've got one in Dallas, Texas on December 15th and one in Austin, Texas on December 16th. I will say I did get an email from the venue in Vienna that we are low on seated tickets for the show. So after a certain point, there's only so many chairs that they put up in this place. So you'd have to do standing room only. So if you want to make sure that your butt can be in a seat, head on over to thenewsolympian.com/live. You can get tickets to this show and /or the other shows. But yeah, we're already at like 123 tickets sold for that Vienna, Virginia show. So it's going to be hype as hell. And coverage wise, I believe we're going to be covering the second half of chapter 17 and then chapters 18 and 19 of The Son of Neptune. I will post if that changes, but I think that's what we're going to do. I got to read the chapters to make sure that that works out, but I think that's what we're going to be covering. Johnny will be the guest. Sherry will be running the Q&A. It's going to be a really fun time. Now, something about this episode in particular, I believe after the break, I'm going to wonder aloud what this movie that I watched in high school that had to deal with someone potentially eating their own children was. It was Titus, which is a modern retelling of Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus. That is what I was looking for. I did watch it in my Latin class because I did take Latin in high school. Now, I've mentioned the Patreon. I want to give a shout out to the folks who have joined the Patreon most recently. Shout out to our newest Super God tier patron, Catherine L. Shout out to our newest God tier patrons, Hannah Schaffer and Itzel Enriquez. And shout out to our newest demigod tier patrons, Kelsey, Lakin Bryant, Kelsey Greaves, Jamie, Dragged Down by the Stone, Kenobi 7J and 5, Luffa, and Isaac Brown. Thank you all so much for your support. May Demeter bless you that if you are ever going to a bakery to get bread for a particular meal, that you get the right type of bread. Sometimes the choices can be overwhelming, but hopefully Demeter can help you make the correct choice. Now, if you're all caught up in the News Olympian and you're looking for some new content to consume, you could check out some of the other podcasts that I make. I make a whole bunch of them. I think they're very good. I'm very biased, but I think they're good. And one that I think you would enjoy is a show called Meddling Adults. Meddling Adults is a podcast game show for charity where I host and guests compete to solve children's mysteries from classics like Encyclopedia Brown, Shelby Woo, Nancy Drew, and more. And the winner earns money for a charity of their choosing. We've done 4 full seasons. We are working on season 5 slowly but surely, and that will come out in 2025 at some point. but it's a fun show. You can play along at home and see if you beat the contestants, and you can just have a fun, mystery-filled day by listening to Meddling Adults wherever you get your podcasts, by searching for Meddling Adults or by going to our website, meddlingadults.com. Now, unless you're listening on Patreon where you get access to ad-free episodes, you're going to hear words from a few sponsors to make it feasible for me to be a full-time podcaster. Some of those ads will be read by me. The current thing that we've got going on is a sponsorship by a company called Pretty Litter that does this really cool cat litter that allows you to see if maybe something is going wrong with your cat, because the litter changes color and stuff. So you'll hear those read by me. You also may hear ones that aren't read by me. Those are inserted locally. So if you live in Brazil, don't be surprised if you hear someone saying obrigado instead of gracias, because that's the Portuguese word for thank you. But anyway, once that's complete, we'll get back into this episode of the News Olympian. And we're back. We're going to talk more about stuff. Another Medea thing in the potions and such. At the top floor of this evil Macy's, she has all of these different potions that do different things. There's one that allows you to forget your memories, and that becomes an important plot thing later in this book. But one of the potions is very ominously described, and I believe the description in the book is that it is something that if the drinker drinks it, they will die like the most painful death possible. And the bottle is in the shape of a swan. And that just felt too specific to not be a reference of sorts. So my question is that a reference of sorts? I feel like Zeus turned into a swan in some story, maybe?
He did. He turned into the swan to pursue Leto, who I'm pretty sure was the mother of Apollo and Artemis.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds correct.
But the potion itself is definitely true from the Medea myths. She created that potion to kill the princess of Corinth. But I didn't see specific references in that myth to a swan-shaped bottle. So that might be another Zeus-based reference, maybe, that Uncle Rick is adding.
Okay, cool. The potion stuff was fun. There was like one potion that was like had a polka dot pattern, even though it's a liquid. Like they get funky with it. And then they all the bottles get broken, and then the big explosion happens, which is always fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so the next person that I had a question about is, and again, this is I'm going to do my best here, Lityerses. He shows up in a King Midas chapter. There's a like King Midas side quest, basically. And it's a bit of the, is this guy going to help us? Is this guy going to be evil? And then soon we realize he's evil, and he's kind of got this like right-hand man, Lityerses, who is supposed to be a very adept fighter.
Okay. Yeah. Lityerses, he is, by most accounts, an illegitimate son of King Midas. Ooh. And he mostly shows up in the myths because of this one interaction he had with Heracles. So Lityerses was, I guess, known as a good, like, farmer, and he would invite people over to his house, or if a passersby happened upon him, he would invite them in, and then he would challenge them to a reaping contest to see who could reap his harvest the fastest, and anyone who
lost... It seems
like
a trick for free labor.
Yes. Yes. Like this, all of the references that I read said that he was like this man of hospitality. And I was like, no,
Everyone come over.
People.
We're going to have a folding my laundry and doing my dishes competition. See who's the winner.
But if you lose, he kills you.
Ah, see, I wouldn't do that.
No.
That's where he and I differ.
Exactly. So his thing is inviting people over, making them do free labor, and then slaughtering them. And he tries to do this with Heracles, and Heracles has none of it and ends up slaughtering him instead and throwing him into a river.
Is there some sort of pull for these people to do it? Like, yes, if you lose, you die. But on the plus side, you could win a bunch of money. Like, is this old school Squid Game? Is there some reason these people are doing it? Or is it all just like hubris of like, I can reap better than you?
Yeah, I didn't see a reason explicitly given, but he is Midas's son. So maybe they assume that they'll get gold if they help him with his harvest.
Okay. Yeah. Or maybe people were just bored. There wasn't a lot to do. Like, we didn't have video games back then, so it's like, sure. I'll do this.
I can't imagine he tells them ahead of time, like, hey, if you lose, I'm gonna kill you.
Okay, so it's not, okay, that, all right. So it's more of like, let's have this fun competition. You didn't realize this, but much like an Apple terms of agreement, you actually did sign away where I'm gonna murder you by entering into my house. Yeah,
that one.
Gotcha. I hate when that happens. I hate those tricky clauses. So next person who shows up, not very long, more of a brief reference, but again, Lycaon, wolf guy.
Oh, yes, wolf guy. Lycaon, maybe. Lycaon was the king of Arcadia, so this old region in around ancient Greece, and he, according to the myths, had 50 different sons. And I guess
that came up in the book.
Oh, okay, good. I wonder if something about having 50 sons just means that they really don't mean anything to him, because his claim to infamy is that he tried to feed one of his sons to Zeus, just to test Zeus's omniscience, to see if he would know what was actually being served on his plate. And of course, Zeus did know, and he got so angry at Lycaon that he killed his sons, he sent a flood to wipe out all humans, and he turned Lycaon into a wolf as punishment.
Yeah, okay. That's basically what we learned. Lycaon kind of says his vibe, and the whole time it's like, are you not listening to yourself, man? Like, are you not hearing what you did? Like, he's all angry at Jason because Jason is a child of Zeus, or as he says, Jupiter. And he's all like, oh, your dad, I hate him because of this. And it's like, I'm not a big Zeus fan, but that feels like you're in the wrong here, my guy.
Yeah, it feels like you around, you found out.
Right, yeah, like, look, killing 50 people, maybe not good. But, I'm not trying to be pro-Zeus here, but I'm also certainly not pro-Lycaon. Maybe now you deserve to be a wolf boy.
There are too many people in ancient Greek mythology trying to feed their children to the gods.
Yeah, what's the other one? Isn't it,
I think it's Tantalus.
Okay, yeah. Oh, right. It was Tantalus. Gosh. Yeah. Was there an emperor or something where that happened too? Like a Roman emperor?
Maybe.
I feel like I watched a movie in Latin class, which I did take in high school. I feel like we watched a movie where it was like a modern thing, like kind of like Romeo plus Juliet, where they do like a modern thing of an old school story. And then there's something about like feeding kids to people and they don't recognize it. And then obviously there's Sweeney Todd, or I guess in the old myths, Sweeney is Taurus. Yeah, so.
Yeah, if you want to show that someone is evil, having them eat children is a really good, fast way to do it.
God. So the next myth I had a question about, it was Aphrodite has something because Piper, she's a daughter of Aphrodite. So we have a dream thing where she kind of talks to Piper about her and her powers and stuff like that. And during this sort of spiel, she says to kind of hype herself up that she was the final child of Ouranos and says that she is greater than the gods and the Titans because of it. Now, I think she's very powerful in Hades, the video game. She has really good power-ups. But in terms of like the mythology, is this true? Is this something that people thought, or is this Aphrodite just kind of being full of herself?
No, it's true. The sources kind of disagree. Homer said that Aphrodite was the daughter of Zeus and a Titan oracle named Dione, who is actually just like the feminized version of old words for Zeus, Dios. Oh. So Homer said that, but Hesiod and other writers said that Aphrodite was born when Kronos castrated Ouranos, and then some of his blood fell into the sea, and the sea foam that rose up is the sea foam that Aphrodite stepped out of. And since the Olympians are the children of the Titans and the grandchildren of Ouranos, Aphrodite does have some claim to being above them in the hierarchy because she is Ouranos' direct descendant.
Gotcha. Now, when it comes into the Kronos thing of eating his children and stuff, how does eating Aphrodite fall into the mix if she would be older than the rest of the Olympians? Like, I guess I'm wondering, does that have implications of like her being born differently than the other Olympians? Is it something where like she gets eaten first? I guess how does that fall into the mix?
I could be wrong here. I don't know that she was eaten.
Oh, okay.
Aphrodite is a really interesting figure. There's a lot of cloudiness around her stories, even her origin story, because she was a much older deity that the Hellenistic Greeks adopted into their pantheon from like older practices. And they had to kind of blend some of those original stories to get the melding of pantheons to work. So there are competing stories about her. Like, she's present from very early on, but doesn't have a lot of agency in the stories early on. Almost like by bringing in these older culture stories, they had to let her be there. But in order to preserve their culture stories, they couldn't let her do anything. So what she did maybe in the original stories was lost, or like she had to be shoehorned into Greek mythology.
So the original retcon is Aphrodite. We have to make her work in this extended universe, but we can't allow things to break the canon. Okay. That's very interesting. Cool, cool, cool. Now, we have a fight towards the end of the book against Enceladus, and he has these minions that he raises from the earth called, this is a fun round if Mike tries to pronounce words, Jegenes?
Yeah.
Okay. So they seem, six-armed earth folk is kind of what they were. They seem kind of like simpletons of sorts in the books, but I'm intrigued to see their mythological basis.
Yeah, there's not much about them in mythology. They're referenced in kind of throwaway lines as six-armed giants. They live on a mountain. I think it's called like Bear Mountain in Mysia, which is the place where the Argonauts left Heracles behind at the behest of the Boreads, Calais and Zethes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I don't think in the myths they're like explicitly associated with Enceladus. They just happen to both be giants, but there are many different races of giants in Greek mythology.
Yeah, we've got a lot going on, especially now with like a bunch of the major giants coming back. Like the whole thing that people are afraid of Gia doing is raising her giant children. So the big thing in this one was like Enceladus is already here, but the whole looming threat is like she's sucking the power out of Hera to bring back Porphyrion, and then they fight Porphyrion briefly at the end. Do you want to spit some Porphyrion game while we're here, if you had anything Porphyrion prepped?
It was mostly about that battle where he attacks Hera, but I did find one other story about the origin of the Gigantomachy, but I couldn't find many sources to support it.
Okay.
There was a giant who stole Helios's prized cattle, and that giant could have been Porphyrion or maybe one of the other two that he's kind of conflated with. And Hera in that version is sent to go and either retrieve the cattle or negotiate the return of the cattle. And that's what makes it seem unrealistic to me. I don't think Hera would ever be sent by the Olympians to do that. That's like not really her role. That's not her domain. But in that version, when she goes to do the negotiation, she does get kidnapped by the kings of the giants, including Porphyrion.
All right. So yeah, I guess that would be kind of the basis of Hera being the one that's kidnapped in this story. And it seems like, which comes up in this book and a little bit in the next, is that a lot of the giants were made specifically to defeat particular Olympians. Like Porphyrion seems to have been, I don't know if he's like particularly anti-Hera, but him and Hera seem like opposed. Enceladus straight up says like, I was made to defeat Athena. And then in book 2, we learn that there's another one who's made to defeat a particular other Olympian. I would just say in the most spoiler-free way possible.
Great.
So yeah, it seems like at least Uncle Rick is tapping into that of like the particular like head-butting between this god and this giant.
Yeah.
And they are adversaries.
And some stories did say that Hera killed one of the giants during the Gigantomachy, but the name changes from source to source.
Interesting. Ooh. I wonder if that's fun for Rick for working with this story more so than the Chrono story of just like, if you've got more things where it's less agreed upon of just there's one thing, maybe he's having more fun of playing around with, well, there's no consensus on this, so we can kind of take this in the ways that I find more fun.
Yeah, as someone who is currently working on a book with a foundation in Greek mythology, yeah, it's really fun when there is that negative space around some characters that you can just add in your own little pizzazz to.
Yeah, and I think that's what Hades the video game has done, where the first one is about Zagreus, who is, from my understanding, not like a super popular, super well fleshed out character. And I don't know if that's the same case for Melinoe, who is the main character of Hades 2, the sequel, but it feels like intentionally they're kind of picking some people who don't have as defined paths, because then they get to do some fun stuff and make some very good video games.
And people won't get as mad that you've deviated from the canon.
That's the big thing, right? You know, you just don't want to get actually emails and stuff. And I can understand working in a way that allows fewer of those in your life.
Yeah.
Okay, switching pace a little bit, we will have the one particular figure from Cherokee mythology that was referenced. Again, pronunciation-wise, I would guess like Tsul Kälû.
That's what I would say.
Okay. Any info on Tsul Kälû? Tsul apostrophe K, A with an umlaut, L, U with a caret on top?
Yeah. I'm not very well versed in Cherokee mythology, but from what I can tell, this isn't like a foundational figure. You know, this isn't one of the deities of the big things in nature, like the sun or rain or something. This is a giant. It's almost like And I don't want to be disrespectful in any way by making this comparison, but almost like a cryptid.
Oh, okay.
I'd say that's where it kind of falls in the folklore of the Cherokee, because it's not involved in any of the really important stories. It's a giant who's a skilled hunter with slanted eyes, and the name itself means slanted-eyed giant. And I was able to find one story, like a recounting of an old grandmother telling this story about Tsul Kälû, who finds a young woman and marries her and has to take her and their young baby away to his homeland because her family disapproves of him because he's big and monstrous and they're afraid of him. In the story, he keeps giving people stipulations to follow if they want to actually see him. So he tells her mother something that she has to do in order to look at him, and she fails immediately. She screams in terror and runs away. And he does the same thing with her brother. He's like, if you want to meet me, then you have to fast for 7 days. You and your whole house have to fast for 7 days. But one person in the house sneaks out at night to eat, so ruins it for everyone. And I think that story in particular seems to come with the lesson of even if it seems ridiculous, if it's a specific set of rules that you have to follow to gain a certain outcome, do it or else you will hurt your community. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's what I found about Tsul Kälû.
Okay. I mean, first off, it's kind of like in Holes when, they don't bring Madame Zeroni up to God's Thumb to drink the water
Sick Holes
from
reference.
The whole thing. Look, I'm always here for it. What's interesting about that is I didn't even think to send this to you ahead of time, but the way that Tsul Kälû comes up in the story is that basically they save Piper's dad, so he's Cherokee, they save Piper's dad from being held captive by Enceladus. And when he is free, he is not necessarily fully there because he's just a normal human mortal guy and he's not in the right mental space to deal with Greek mythology and monsters are real and stuff.
Yeah.
He says Mother Earth was angry with him, and then he calls Enceladus instead of Enceladus or Enchiladas or all the other things I've called him. He calls him Tsul Kälû. So it's interesting that he's basically saying this evil giant of sorts calls him a different Cherokee evil giant of sorts. But what's also extra fascinating with the particular, you have to follow my rules, is in The Lost Hero, Enceladus's whole thing is that he is communicating with Piper in her dreams to try and get her to kind of go over to the dark side. And the way that he's doing that is by holding her dad hostage and captive and basically saying you need to do these very specific things. You need to bring the other two people you're on the quest with here to this mountain, and then you have to kill them on this mountain. So there's very specific rules for her to follow. Otherwise, she'll never see her dad again. He's going to harm her dad. And she kind of has to follow this. So it's interesting that I want to kind of know the chicken and the egg with Uncle Rick doing this, but it feels like part of his inspiration for how Enceladus, how he works in this book is inspired by Tsul Kälû. And I wonder if that whole thing was he knew he was going to do it and make that reference at the end. And then maybe someone who does know Cherokee mythology goes, I was thinking he was acting like this guy. So that's really cool.
Oh, I hope so.
That's fun.
Uncle Rick needs to come on the pod.
Gosh, I would absolutely love it. I've certainly tried, and I've kind of had him sort of on once, but I would absolutely love to make it happen, and I would just ask him so many questions. Okay, that's all I had for the prepared things. I think one final thing just to kind of leave it, because now that we've talked a little bit how this book series main thing is kind of showing there's not just the Greek folk, there is the Roman folk. Generally, what we've learned is that it seems like the Roman aspects of the gods are more warlike because the Roman people were more strict and more invested in wars and stuff like that. Whether you have examples of specific gods Juno is like this and Hera's like this, or just overarching, just to kind of set the tone for our future mythological check-in episodes. When we're dealing with the Greek version of the Olympians and then the Roman version of the Olympians, what are the things that kind of come to mind of the differences between the two?
Oh, Ooh, I think you hit the nail on the head with there's more of a violent, warlike emphasis. The thing about Rome is that over time they spread themselves so far and so thin, and the way they did that was by kind of melding the folklore of the groups they encountered in with theirs. The Greeks did the same thing, right? Like that's why Aphrodite is so cloudy. But the Romans did that through a lot of very harsh conquest, and they were also extending into regions that themselves were kind of warlike tribes. And so that kind of multiplied together to make more violent leaning gods.
Okay. I guess that makes sense, right? Yeah, you're already warlike, you're conquering people, there's battles happening. Like you just said, the people you're particularly conquering are also warlike. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of like earmark that as we continue going through and learning more of the mythology. But it's been really exciting. It's fun to kind of just like get some new stuff into the mix. And I'm excited to see like how it continues and what other stories come in. It feels like The Lost Hero was pretty Jason and the Argonauts heavy. And as seemingly is in every book, a lot of Hercules play. I don't know if that guy just is in all of the stories or if Rick really just likes him. But it feels like every time you and I chat about this, it's like, yeah, so Heracles did this and Heracles did that. But I'm excited to see what exactly comes through with the second book in the series, The Son of Neptune.
Going back to a son of Poseidon.
Yes.
That's
perhaps
so
one that we know. Percy's back.
Which is, I didn't know
Percy
that.
was not around in the first book of the sequel series, but he is back in the second one. But he is at the Roman camp. And that's not spoiler for anyone following along, because basically the end of book one is Jason getting some of his memories back because Hera had his memories hidden from him for like this plan and stuff, because what we learn is Jason, so you'll know this as you've read the fifth book and stuff. So at the same time that Percy and our Greek friends were defeating Kronos, Jason and the Roman friends were defeating Krios and other titans on Mount Othrys. And that was like happening simultaneously. So we learned that like Jason had those memories and then Hera kind of wiped them away. And then at the very end, he's like, and he's like realizing all this stuff. So anyway, yeah, book two, we've got Percy back, Son of Neptune, and I have not gotten far enough in that book to know like what the mythological things are, because it's been a lot of world building kind of stuff. I think I'm like just approaching where they're like about to go on the quest, which again is not a spoiler because every Percy Jackson book they go on the quest like at close to a third of the way through the book. So they're about to do that. So I think we're like now getting into the things where I'll be wondering mythological inspirations. So I'm excited to see like where they take it. Is it more Hercules stuff? Is it another story where it's kind of like following Jason and the Argonauts like the last book did? Or is it going to be piecing from lots of different other stories? I'm very intrigued.
Yeah. You said that in the Roman version, they were fighting against Krios, I think. Krios. Because the Roman version of Kronos is Saturn. So I wonder why he didn't just have them fight the Roman version. Like Kronos was fighting on both fronts.
Oh, so basically the way it's kind of working in the Percy Jackson books with the new people is like there's still just one being. Like they're not like in two places at the same time. It's just kind of like whoever's talking to them, they will kind of like take the form of whatever mythology they believe. So like when, we've got people dealing with Hera in the Percy Jackson books, like she's clearly Hera. And when we've got people dealing with Hera in the sequel books, like she's more Juno, or even like kind of like an in-between where it's like, she's got like a goat hide cape and stuff. What's going on there? And that's like, the book even says like, this is more of her Juno vibe. So I think because Percy and the demigods from Camp Half-Blood were fighting Kronos, that's why they're fighting Kronos. And I don't know if you remember in book 5, there was a thing where there's like a Nico coming into Percy's dreams and showing him that Krios and I think another Titan, I forget, were like having a meeting on Mount Othrys. So basically Jason took them down, and that was like going on simultaneously while the Kronos fight was happening.
Oh, nice.
So we're starting to expand more, and I wonder if that'll even like come up even more about the particulars, because it was kind of like very much revealed to us at the very end of the first book, and we haven't really had a conversation of Percy and Jason meeting yet. They're still separate. Ooh. So, I mean, it's exciting. We'll just have to see. But I look forward to our future chats as I can continue to let you know, like, here's what's going on now. Because obviously I don't know what's going on, so it'll be fun.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Yeah, well, Dr. Moiya, thank you as always for enlightening us, letting us understand the mythologies, the pronunciations. We're all doing our best here. But if people want to find you doing stuff, where can they find you doing stuff?
Yeah, I'm on all the socials, but mostly these days TikTok and Instagram at GoAstroMo. My website is moiamctier.com. And you can listen to my voice every week on my astronomy podcast for people who are overwhelmed by the universe but want to be its friend. It's called Pale Blue Pod.
And then new book. Do we want to tease up the Muses book? I know it might be like years down the road. I don't know, months or whatever down the road, but still.
So if your memory is good enough to remember this conversation in 2026, I will
Or you're listening in 2026. You never know.
That too. I am currently working on my second book. It's called Mothers of Invention. It's a history of scientific inventions and human creativity, and it's written from the perspective of the Muses from Greek mythology. So that's what I'm doing with most of my time these days.
So fun. And I like that you're ramping up your already difficult task of like, how do I write a book from the perspective of the Milky Way book one? And you're like, what if I had more people and I had to write different perspectives?
Yeah, Mike, you're not wrong. I had a meeting with my agent a couple weeks ago and I said, Jeff, don't let me do something like this again.
As someone who also makes things hard on themselves for the purpose of like, but it'll be better. I understand. Right. The amount of production work that Sherry and I do on these episodes, like we do so much things to make it sound perfect. And like, I know there's very popular podcasts out there where they just like hit record, hit upload. It's like, but
the quality.
But I will be proud of it. Yeah, I understand let me play life on expert mode, even though no one is forcing me to play life on expert mode.
Yep, you get it.
Maybe we'll get bonus points in whatever the afterlife is. But Dr. Moiya, thank you so much for being on this episode and enlightening all of us listeners. Thank you for listening. And until next time, where I'm pretty sure scheduling-wise, the next episode will be the beginning of our coverage of the Son of Neptune. Oh, until then, I'll pursue you later. Hey, thanks so much for listening to this episode of The Newest Olympian. This podcast is created, hosted, and produced by me, Mike Schubert. I also run the social media and the website. Our editor is Sherry Guo. The music is by Bettina Campamontes and Brandon Grugel, and the art is by Jessica E. Boyd. If you love the podcast and you just can't get enough, there's a couple of different things you can do. First, you can go to thenewestolympian.com/Patreon. You can join the Patreon, and you can get access to a whole bunch of fun bonus content. You can also follow us on social media. We're at Newest Olympian on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. There's also a subreddit, reddit.com/r/thenewestolympian. And there's also the TNO Discord, which you get access to by joining any TNO tier on the Patreon. You can learn all about the show at thenewestolympian.com, and you can get some sweet TNO merch at thenewestolympian.com/merch. I've mentioned the Patreon, so let's give a shout out to our producer level patrons: Kelsey Gillespie, the Damn Steam Nuggets, Vicky Garcia, Frida Vikstrom, Megan Moon, Sabrina Balsiger, Polly Burge, Nikki Harris, Tatiana Schmidt, Sandra Rose, Josh Sayer, Josh Wilkie, Abby Ryan, Marco Redhouse, Sam Reeby, Mrs. O'Leary, Milo Kim, Sandkoff, Rika, Ryla Matthews, Sky Mallory, Persasabeth, Aiden Parziani, Grace, Ginger Spurs Boy, A Cup of Solace, Bradimus Prime, Skylar Sisters, Scott Sheldon, Sophie, Natanya Page, Ann M. Thayer Cohen, Bella, Percy Jackson, Han, Haley Hingelheimer Schmidt, Catherine Sloan, Jessica Phillips, Haley Mary, Jim Jam Koopy, Kit Kat Crumbs, and Andrea, not Andrea. If you want to support the show in a non-monetary way, just tell someone about the podcast. It really does help a lot, whether that is you reaching out to someone directly who you think might enjoy the podcast. Maybe they're a big Percy Jackson fan. Maybe they've been looking for an excuse to read the books. Or if you post about the show on social media, or you leave us a rating and review on whatever podcasting app you're using. Truly, all of these things help. I really appreciate anyone who has done it in the past, and I also appreciate anyone who will do it in the future. But I'm just so thankful that you tuned into this episode, and I hope you tune into our next episode where we will be joined by Johnny Frolickstein live in New York City to break down the first 2 chapters of The Son of Neptune. But until then, I'll pursue you later. Hey everyone, how's it going? It's me, ASMR Mike. So in the Shibu here, I have my calculator watch, which I wear very often, and specifically I always try to wear on stage at live shows. And I usually don't have it on when I'm recording because it can, as you might be able to hear in the background, like make some noise when it jangles around. But by being a calculator watch, it can do math. So I'm just going to quickly do 17 times 38, and we'll see what that yields us. So let's go. How do I do some math? Mode, calculator, here we go. 17 times 38. I may have done this for an ASMR Mike segment. Apologies if I have. That equals 646. The more you know. Thank you for listening.